Why is Ukraine the center of the most dangerous conflict in Europe since World War II?
Решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
Ukraine says Russian forces carried out 567 attacks over the last 24 hours.
You hear that sound? That's the sound of small arms fire, and we're hearing it every few minutes now.
To Russia, Ukraine is the heart of a lost empire. To the West, it's a test of democracy and global resolve. To Ukrainians, it's a fight for freedom and survival. But this war isn't just about Russia and the West. It affects everyone, including India. From food security and oil prices to arms diplomacy and multipolar politics. The Ukraine war is reshaping India's choices too. And as India rises, it must ask, how do you stay non-aligned in a world breaking into camps? In this video, we'll break down why Ukraine matters so much, from geography and history to revolutions, invasions, pipelines, and Putin's imperial vision. You'll see how this war became the fault line between two worldviews, and why what happens here will shape the world for generations. Let's dive into it. Ukraine sits at a geographical and strategic crossroads in Eastern Europe. It borders Russia, Belarus, Poland, Hungary, Romania, and the Black Sea. This positioning makes it a crucial land bridge between Europe and Eurasia. For Russia, Ukraine provides a buffer against the expansion of NATO and Western influence. Historically, Russia has been invaded multiple times through Ukraine, from Napoleon to Hitler, and seized control or influence over Ukraine as a way to secure its vulnerable western flank. For the West, Ukraine is a frontier of democracy, rule of law, and post-Soviet integration. Since the 1990s, it's been seen as a testing ground for whether a post-Soviet state can transition towards democratic norms and a market economy. Ukraine also boasts fertile black soil, making it one of the world's largest grain exporters. Access to strategic ports, Odessa, Mariupol on the Black Sea, key for global trade and military control. Transit routes for natural gas pipelines, carrying Russian gas to European markets. Critical minerals like lithium and rare earths, resources increasingly vital in the global energy transition. In short, Ukraine's geography and natural wealth make it a target for influence, economically, politically, and militarily. For countries like India, Ukraine's geography may seem distant, but it's not irrelevant. India's wheat imports, fertilizer supply, and energy costs all shot up when war disrupted these very Black Sea routes. Global food and fuel prices aren't local anymore. They're linked to war zones like Ukraine.
Wheat prices are up 33%. Sunflower oil prices up 60%.
Russia and Ukraine share deep historical and cultural roots, but diverging national identities. Kievan Rus was a medieval polity centered in Kiev that both Russia and Ukraine claim as their civilizational origin. For Russia, this forms a narrative of unity, that Ukraine is an inseparable part of the Russian world. But history tells a different story. After the Mongol invasions, Ukrainian lands came under Polish-Lithuanian rule, and later, parts were absorbed into the Russian Empire, Austria-Hungary, and eventually the USSR. In the 20th century, the Holodomor famine, engineered by Stalin, killed millions of Ukrainians. It's seen as a genocide by Ukraine and many Western countries, an event that seeded deep anti-Russian sentiment. After World War II, Ukraine was folded into the Soviet Union, becoming a major industrial and agricultural center. But independence in 1991, following the Soviet collapse, was widely supported. even in Russian-speaking regions. Since then, Ukraine has faced a bit of an identity crisis. A Ukrainian-speaking pro-European West, a Russian-speaking pro-Russian East. However, events over the past 2 decades, especially Russia's invasions, have largely unified Ukrainian identity against Russian aggression. Ukraine's modern struggle centers on its political alignment, West or East. In 2004, the Orange Revolution erupted over a rigged presidential election favoring pro-Russian candidate Viktor Yanukovych. Massive protests led to a revote and victory for the pro-Western Viktor Yushchenko. By 2010, Yanukovych returned to power, tilting back towards Moscow. But in 2013, he rejected an EU association agreement under Kremlin pressure, which ignited the Euromaidan protests. For months, Ukrainians protested for closer ties to the EU. In February 2014, after violent crackdowns and public pressure, Yanukovych fled. A new pro-Western government took power. Russia's response was immediate and forceful. It annexed Crimea in March 2014, home to Russia's Black Sea Fleet and a majority Russian-speaking population. This was the first forcible change of European borders since World War II. Russia then fueled a separatist war in Donetsk and Luhansk in eastern Ukraine. Though denying direct involvement, Moscow supplied weapons, fighters, and intelligence. To Russia, Euromaidan was a Western orchestrated coup. To Ukrainians and the West, it was a democratic revolution. The West's support for Ukraine goes beyond sympathy. It's strategic. Let's look at the reasons behind this. Number 1, defending international norms. The post-World War II order rests on the principle that borders cannot be changed by force. Russia violated this in Crimea and again in the full-scale invasion of 2022. Number 2, democracy versus autocracy. Ukraine symbolizes the possibility that a former Soviet republic can become a functioning democracy. The Kremlin fears that this example may influence Russians at home. Number 3, energy security. Ukraine is a key energy transit hub. Reducing Russian influence over Ukraine helps Europe diversify its energy resources and lessen dependency on Russian gas. Number 4, military and strategic value. A sovereign Ukraine blocks Russian access to Europe's soft underbelly. A Russian-dominated Ukraine would shift the power balance eastward. Number 5, containment and deterrence. Arming Ukraine depletes Russian military capability without NATO soldiers being directly involved. A form of proxy containment. That said, the West is divided in degree. The US and UK are more forward-leaning on military aid. Some European Union nations, especially Germany and Hungary, have hesitated due to economic ties with Russia or fear of escalation. But the core consensus holds. Ukraine's survival is seen as essential to a rules-based international system. While the West has picked sides, India has walked a tightrope, condemning violence but refusing to join sanctions. Why? Because India sees the world differently, not as a Cold War reboot, but as a shifting order where power is diffuse, not binary. That's why India buys Russian oil while also deepening ties with the US. Realpolitik, not ideology. Now, to truly grasp why Ukraine matters so much to Russia, you have to step into Vladimir Putin's worldview, one shaped by history, trauma, and a vision of Russia as a civilizational power. Putin has called the collapse of the Soviet Union the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. He believes that Russia was not defeated, but humiliated, its influence eroded, its security buffer stripped away, and its people scattered across newly independent states, especially Ukraine. In this vision, Ukraine is not a foreign country. It is the keystone of Russian identity, empire, and destiny. Losing Ukraine, especially to Western alliances, is seen not just as a strategic blow, but a civilizational betrayal. This belief underpins Russia's long game to reclaim influence in its near-abroad former Soviet republics, to challenge NATO's expansion, which Russia sees as encirclement, to restore Russia's status as a great power, not by joining Western institutions, but by opposing them. Putin's war isn't just about NATO. It's about resisting a Western-dominated global order. And that has ripple effects for rising powers like India, who also want a multipolar world, but not through invasion and force. Putin echoes elements of Eurasianist thought, an ideology that views Russia as a unique civilization, neither fully European nor Asian, destined to lead a multipolar world. He sees liberal democracy as decadent, chaotic, and foreign to Russian tradition. In this view, the West exports instability, color revolutions, civil unrest, and cultural erosion. From the Kremlin's view, Ukraine's democracy is a dangerous model that could inspire Russian dissent. Military force is seen as a strategic instrument of statecraft, not merely a last resort. A major goal is to prevent NATO forces from ever sitting on Russia's doorstep. Ukraine joining NATO would mean Western missile systems potentially within minutes of Moscow. Hence the Kremlin's latest rhetoric, creating a buffer zone in eastern Ukraine, territory under direct or indirect Russian control, separating it from NATO-aligned states. Medvedev, now a hawkish voice aligned with Kremlin hardliners, has called for Russia to hold this buffer for at least 100 years, a sign of how entrenched the vision has become in some quarters. That's not just about land, it's about shaping Ukraine's future, preventing military alignment with the West, undermining Ukrainian sovereignty through frozen conflict zones, rewriting the map and the memory of Ukraine as a failed Western experiment. What Putin didn't anticipate was Ukraine's fierce national resistance, even in Russian-speaking regions. A reinvigorated NATO, with Finland and Sweden now joining in, a more cohesive European Union, moving away from Russian energy dependence. A prolonged costly war, with no clear path to decisive victory. Ironically, in trying to prevent Ukraine from becoming westernized, Putin accelerated that very transformation. Ukrainians now overwhelmingly support European Union and NATO membership. Ukrainian identity has hardened, not as a cousin of Russia, but as its opposite. Ukraine matters because it sits at the convergence of geography, history, identity, and ideology. To Russia, it's both a symbol of empire and a strategic necessity. To the West, it's a test of values, security, and global norms. And to India, positioning itself as a leader of the global South, it's a case study in balance. How to protect sovereignty, resist camps, and lead in a world no longer defined by two poles. Ukraine matters, and the way this war ends will play a huge part in shaping the global order. That brings us to the end of this video. For more such deep dives into geopolitics and society, please subscribe to our channel. And until next time, stay curious, stay unaligned.